The frost on the window turned my breath white as I pressed my face against the glass, watching my father hand my stepbrother the PlayStation I had begged for all year. 14 degrees below zero Christmas Eve, and here I was locked outside like some unwanted dog because I dared question why Jennifer got to sit in Mom's chair at dinner. My fingers had gone numb 20 minutes ago. My toes felt like ice cubes, but nothing prepared me for what happened when that black limousine pulled up to our house at exactly 9:47 p.m. 3 years ago, Christmas Eve meant hot cocoa with marshmallows, my mother's laughter echoing through our warm kitchen and the smell of her famous gingerbread cookies filling every corner of our house. Mom would tell me stories about her childhood while we decorated the tree together, and I felt like the luckiest girl in the world. Tonight, staring through that frozen window, I could barely remember what that happiness felt like. The evening had started badly and gotten progressively worse. Jennifer, my stepmother, had spent the entire afternoon rearranging our living room to showcase her new Christmas decorations. She'd packed away every single photo of my mother, claiming they made the room look cluttered. When I asked where she'd put them, she waved dismissively toward the basement, saying something about storage being their proper place now. Dinner became a theatrical performance of favoritism, so obvious as it hurt to watch. Jennifer had prepared Trevor's favorite meal, prime rib with Yorkshire pudding, while I got served leftover chicken from 2 nights ago. When Trevor complained that his mashed potatoes weren't creamy enough, Jennifer immediately rushed to make fresh ones. When I mentioned my chicken was cold, Dad told me to stop being ungrateful and use the microwave myself. But the moment that sent everything spiraling happened when I walked into the dining room and saw Jennifer sitting in my mother's antique mahogany chair. That chair had belonged to my maternal grandmother, passed down through 3 generations of women in our family. Mom used to tell me it would be mine someday, a symbol of our family's strength and resilience. Jennifer sat there like a queen, running her manicured fingers along the carved armrests that my mother had touched thousands of times. "That's my mom's chair," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. The room went silent. Dad's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Trevor stopped chewing his perfectly seasoned prime rib. Jennifer's face transformed from surprise to calculated hurt in the span of 2 seconds. "Excuse me." Jennifer's voice carried that particular tone she used when she wanted to sound wounded. "This is my dining room now, Mary. I think I can sit wherever I choose." But it belonged to my grandmother. I continued, my heart pounding. Mom always sat there. It's been in our family for generations. Dad's face darkened like storm clouds gathering. "Mary Elizabeth, you will not speak to Jennifer that way. She is the woman of this house now, and she has every right to sit anywhere she pleases." Jennifer dabbed at her eyes with her cloth napkin, though I couldn't see any actual tears. "I try so hard to make this feel like home for everyone, David, but Mary always makes me feel like an intruder in my own house." Trevor, ever the opportunist, saw his chance to pile on. "Yeah, Dad, earlier Mary called Jennifer a gold digger when you were outside getting the mail." The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly I almost believed it myself for a second. "Oh, I never said that," I protested, but Dad was already standing his chair, scraping against the hardwood floor with a harsh sound that made me flinch. "That is enough," his voice boomed through the dining room. "I will not tolerate this disrespect toward my wife. Jennifer has done nothing but try to love you like her own daughter, and this is how you repay her kindness." Jennifer's performance reached its crescendo. "Maybe we should just cancel Christmas altogether. I can't bear the thought of celebrating when Mary clearly hates having me here." She covered her face with both hands, her shoulders shaking with theatrical sobs. No way," Trevor jumped to his defense. "Mom planned this whole Christmas for weeks. Mary's just being a spoiled brat because she's not the center of attention anymore." The injustice of it all crashed over me like a wave. Here I was, the actual daughter, being painted as the villain while these people took over every aspect of my life. "I just wanted to sit in my mother's chair," I said, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. "Is that really too much to ask?" Dad grabbed my arm so tightly I knew there would be bruises tomorrow. "You want to act like a child? Fine. You can spend some time outside thinking about your attitude. He dragged me toward the front door while Jennifer and Trevor watched with satisfaction. Dad, please, it's freezing outside, I begged, but he was already grabbing my winter coat from the closet and shoving it at me. You'll come back inside when you're ready to apologize to Jennifer and mean it, he said, opening the door. The bitter December air hit my face like a slap. Until then, you can think about how lucky you are to have someone willing to be your mother. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that made my stomach drop. I stood there for several minutes, convinced this was just another one of Dad's dramatic punishments that would end when his anger cooled. I knocked gently, then more firmly, calling out apologies that went unanswered. But as I moved around to the living room window, I witnessed something that shattered my heart completely. Jennifer was opening a small velvet jewelry box I recognized immediately. Inside was my grandmother's emerald necklace, the one my mother had shown me countless times, promising it would be mine when I turned 18. Jennifer lifted it out with reverent fingers, fastening it around her neck while Dad watched approvingly. It suits you perfectly, I could see him saying through the glass. Margaret would have wanted you to have it. That was when I knew this wasn't just punishment. This was erasure. The cold hit differently when you realize nobody's coming to save you. What started as angry shivers became uncontrollable trembling as the temperature continued dropping. I found a spot between the garage and the house where the wind couldn't cut through me as brutally, but the concrete beneath me felt like sitting on blocks of ice. I wrapped my arms around my knees and tried to remember the last time I felt truly warm. It was probably last Christmas before Jennifer moved in and transformed our house into something unrecognizable. Mom and I had stayed up until midnight, making sugar cookies shaped like snowflakes, each one unique and delicate. She'd let me lick the frosting bowl while she told me stories about growing up in her grandmother's mansion, a magical place filled with secret passages and rooms full of antique treasures. Your grandmother Victoria was an amazing woman, Mom had said carefully, piping white icing onto a cookie. She traveled the world, spoke 4 languages, and built an empire from nothing. I wish you could have met her properly. I'd asked why Grandmother Victoria never visited, and Mom's expression had grown sad. She lives very far away, sweetheart, and our relationship became complicated after I married your father. But she sends you gifts every birthday and Christmas, that beautiful music box in your room that came from her. Sitting in the freezing cold, I wondered if my mysterious grandmother would care that her granddaughter was being treated like garbage. Mom had always been vague about their family money, claiming they'd lost most of it before I was born, but the gifts that arrived each year suggested otherwise. Beautiful, expensive things that Dad always seemed uncomfortable receiving. The house windows glowed warmly against the dark December night, and I couldn't stop myself from moving between them like some desperate ghost haunting my former life. Through the living room window, I watched Trevor rip through presents that should have waited until Christmas morning, designer clothes, expensive electronics, gift cards to stores I could only dream of shopping in. Dad and Jennifer sat on the couch sharing a bottle of wine and laughing about something I couldn't hear. They looked like a perfect family, complete, happy, like they'd never been interrupted by my existence at all. The kitchen window offered an even more painful view. Jennifer was cutting slices from a chocolate cake I'd watched her make that afternoon, the one she'd specifically told me was for family only, when I'd asked if I could help. Now she served generous portions to Dad and Trevor while they talked animatedly about their plans for tomorrow's Christmas celebration. My lips were starting to feel thick and numb. I could barely feel my toes inside my winter boots, and my breath came out in thick, white puffs that reminded me of the ghosts in the Christmas movies Mom and I used to watch together. I thought about knocking on neighbors' doors, but the Johnsons had left for Florida 3 days ago, and the Millers never got involved in what they called domestic situations. That's when I made my way to Dad's study window and saw something that made my blood run even colder than the December air. Dad and Jennifer were going through cardboard boxes I recognized as containing my mother's belongings. Things I thought had been safely stored in the basement were spread across Dad's desk like items at a garage sale. Jennifer held up my mother's wedding dress, shaking it out and holding it against her body while Dad nodded approvingly. She said something that made him laugh, probably about alterations or how much better it would look on her. Then she moved on to my mother's jewelry box, the one Dad had claimed was too painful to look at after Mom died. One by one, Jennifer examined each piece. Mom's pearl earrings, her gold bracelet, the ruby ring that had belonged to my great-grandmother. Jennifer tried them on like she was shopping in her favorite boutique, while Dad sorted through documents and papers with the efficiency of a man conducting business. I pressed my ear against the cold glass, straining to hear fragments of their conversation. Dad's voice carried better than Jennifer's, and what I caught made my stomach churn. "The insurance money will cover Trevor's college," he was saying. "And if we sell some of these pieces, we can finally afford that kitchen renovation you wanted." Insurance money. What insurance money? Mom had died in a car accident 3 years ago. I'd assumed any insurance had gone toward paying off her medical bills and funeral expenses. But Dad was talking about it like it was recent income available for spending on Jennifer's wish list. Jennifer's voice became clearer as she moved closer to the window. "What about the other stuff? The papers and documents, should we just throw them away?" "Most of it's worthless," Dad replied. "Old letters, photo albums, sentimental garbage. Mary doesn't need to be hanging on to the past forever." They were throwing away my mother's memories like they were clearing out a storage unit full of junk. Letters, Mom had saved photos documenting her life before I existed, pieces of family history that belonged to me by right. I watched Jennifer toss aside a bundle of letters tied with a blue ribbon, the same blue ribbon Mom had worn in her hair on her wedding day. But it was what happened next that changed everything. Dad picked up his phone and dialed a number, speaking in the low, careful tone he used for important business calls. Yes, it's David Harrison," he said, pacing behind his desk. "I wanted to follow up on our conversation about the inheritance situation." Inheritance. What inheritance? Mom had always said her family had lost their money years ago. "Right, exactly," Dad continued. "With the old woman finally out of the picture, there's no reason Mary needs to know what's rightfully hers. The trust fund should remain sealed until she's 25, just like we discussed." Trust fund! My mother had left me a trust fund, and Dad was actively hiding it from me. I pressed closer to the window, my breath fogging the glass as I strained to hear every word. "Ugh, no, she suspects nothing," Dad assured whoever was on the other end of the call. "As far as Mary knows, her grandmother died poor and her mother left her nothing but memories. She'll never know about the Ashworth money." Ashworth money. My mother's maiden name was Ashworth. My grandmother's name was Victoria Ashworth, and apparently there was money involved that Dad was systematically keeping from me. The conversation continued, but Jennifer had moved closer to Dad and their voices dropped too low for me to understand. What I could see clearly was Dad opening an envelope that looked official, like something from a bank or law firm. Jennifer peered over his shoulder as he read it, and both of them smiled like people who'd just received very good news. I stumbled backward from the window, my mind reeling. My father wasn't just neglecting me or favoring his new family. He was actively stealing from me, hiding assets that belonged to me, and planning to keep me in ignorance for years. The cold I'd been feeling was nothing compared to the ice-cold realization that the man I'd called Dad my entire life was a criminal. My hands had gone completely numb, and I could no longer feel my feet in my boots. But the pain in my chest had nothing to do with the temperature. It came from understanding that I was truly alone in the world, surrounded by people who saw me as an obstacle to their happiness and financial security. I made my way back to the living room window for one last look at the family that had discarded me. Trevor was playing his new PlayStation, while Dad and Jennifer cuddled on the couch sharing another bottle of wine. They looked peaceful, content, like people who'd successfully solved a problem that had been bothering them for years. The problem apparently had been me. I almost missed it at first, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me in the darkness. But the headlights cutting through the December night were real, and they belonged to a car unlike anything I'd ever seen in our modest suburban neighborhood. The limousine was so black it seemed to absorb light, its chrome details reflecting the Christmas lights strung on houses up and down our street. My first instinct was to hide. In my 3 hours of being locked outside, I developed an almost animal fear of being seen in my current state. My hair hung in frozen strands around my face. My lips had turned a shade of blue I'd only seen in medical textbooks, and my entire body shook with tremors I couldn't control. Whoever was in that expensive car wouldn't want to see a half-frozen teenager huddled by a garage like some abandoned pet. But curiosity won over shame. I crept closer to the street, using parked cars as cover, trying to get a better look at this automotive miracle that had appeared in our working-class neighborhood, like something from a fairy tale. The limousine's engine purred with the kind of quiet power that spoke of serious money, and its license plate was custom, but too far away for me to read clearly. The passenger door opened, and a woman emerged with the kind of grace I'd only seen in old movies. She was tall, probably in her 70s, with silver hair styled in an elegant chignon that had probably cost more than my father made in a month. Her coat was charcoal gray cashmere that fell to her ankles, and even from a distance I could see jewelry that caught the streetlight like captured stars. Everything about her radiated power and money, but it was her face that stopped my heart. Even across the dark yard, even through the haze of my half-frozen vision, I recognized her immediately. This was the woman from the photographs my mother had hidden in her jewelry box, the ones she'd shown me secretly when Dad wasn't around. This was Victoria Ashworth, my grandmother, who was supposed to have died 2 years ago. She stood beside the limousine for several minutes, studying our house with the intensity of an architect examining blueprints. Her gaze moved from window to window, taking in the warm yellow light spilling from each room, the Christmas decorations. Jennifer had insisted on hanging the general appearance of middle-class contentment. But there was something calculating in her assessment, like she was appraising property rather than simply observing. That's when she saw me. I'd grown careless in my shock, stepping too far from the shadow of the parked car that had been concealing me. The streetlight hit my face, illuminating my pathetic condition in all its frozen glory. For a moment, we stared at each other across the lawn, grandmother and granddaughter meeting for what felt like the first time in my life. Her expression transformed completely. The cool assessment vanished, replaced by something that looked like pure fury mixed with heartbreak. She moved toward me with swift, determined steps, her expensive heels clicking against the frozen sidewalk with military precision. "Oh, Mary," her voice carried the slight accent I remembered from the few phone calls she'd made to our house before Mom died. "Is that really you, sweetheart?" I tried to answer, but my teeth were chattering too violently to form coherent words. She reached me in seconds, her warm hands cupping my frozen face with surprising gentleness. Up close, she smelled like expensive perfume and something comforting I couldn't identify, maybe lavender or vanilla. "Oh, good Lord, child, you're frozen solid," she murmured, already shrugging out of her cashmere coat and wrapping it around my shoulders. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming, like being embraced by everything I'd been missing for the past 3 hours. "How long have you been out here?" "Since dinner," I managed to whisper through numb lips. "Dad locked me out." Her face hardened into an expression that would have terrified me if it had been directed at me instead of my father. "He locked you out in this weather on Christmas Eve." Each question came out sharper than the last, like she was building a case for prosecution. I nodded, suddenly embarrassed by how pathetic my situation sounded when spoken aloud. "I questioned why Jennifer was sitting in Mom's chair, and Dad said I was being disrespectful. He told me I could come back when I was ready to apologize and mean it." Victoria's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "And how long ago was this dinner?" 3 hours, maybe 4, I said, glancing at the house where warm light continued to pour from every window. "They're opening presents now. Christmas presents that were supposed to wait until tomorrow morning." Victoria followed my gaze to the living room window where Trevor was still playing his new PlayStation, while Dad and Jennifer shared what looked like their 3rd bottle of wine. The scene of domestic bliss was perfectly framed by Jennifer's new Christmas curtains, like a greeting card image of family happiness. "I see," Victoria said, her voice carrying the kind of controlled anger that suggested serious consequences were coming. And tell me, Mary, has your father explained why I supposedly died 2 years ago? The question confused me. Supposedly, but Dad said you had a heart attack in your apartment in Florida. He said you didn't have any money left and we couldn't afford to fly down for the funeral. Victoria's laugh held no humor whatsoever. A heart attack in Florida. How wonderfully convenient for David. She turned back toward the house, studying it with renewed interest. And I suppose he's told you nothing about your inheritance, nothing about the trust fund your mother established, nothing about the properties and investments that belong to you. My head was spinning, and not just from the cold. What inheritance? Mom always said your family lost their money years ago. She said that's why you couldn't help us when she got sick. Oh, my dear child, Victoria said, her voice soft with sympathy. Your mother and I had our differences, but she never would have wanted this. She specifically asked me to watch over you if anything happened to her. I've been trying to honor that request for 3 years, but David has been very creative about keeping us apart. She reached into her purse and pulled out a phone that looked like it cost more than our car. I need you to understand something very important, Mary. I didn't die 2 years ago. I've been living in New York under my business name, managing the companies I built over the past 40 years. And I've been watching this house. Watching the house, I repeated, not sure I understood. Private investigators, she explained matter-of-factly. Very discreet ones. I needed to know how you were being treated, whether David was honoring his obligations as your guardian. What I've learned has been quite illuminating. She gestured toward the house where Dad and Jennifer were now visible through the kitchen window, cleaning up the remains of their private Christmas celebration. Your father has been receiving monthly payments from your trust fund for the past 3 years, ostensibly for your care and education. He's also been getting survivor benefits from your mother's life insurance policy. All told, he's received almost $300,000 that was meant specifically for your well-being. $300,000! The number was so large I couldn't even process it properly. But we live in this tiny house, I said weakly. Dad's always complaining about money. He drives a 10-year-old truck. Exactly, Victoria said with grim satisfaction, which raises the interesting question of where all that money has gone. Perhaps toward Jennifer's wardrobe, Trevor's private school tuition, the European vacation they took last summer while you stayed home with your aunt. I remembered that vacation. Dad had claimed it was a business trip, but the photos Jennifer posted on social media told a different story. Fancy restaurants, luxury hotels, shopping excursions that cost more than most people made in a month. Meanwhile, I'd spent 2 weeks eating cereal for dinner because Aunt Linda didn't believe in spending money on groceries. Victoria looked at the house again, her expression hardening into something that reminded me of my mother when she was truly angry. It was an expression that meant consequences were coming and they wouldn't be pleasant for whoever had caused the problem. Tell me, Mary, she said quietly, what would you say if I told you that your father doesn't own this house, that his construction business operates on loans I provide, that every dollar he spends comes from accounts I control? I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. I don't understand. Victoria smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. It was the smile of someone who held all the cards and was about to reveal a winning hand. I'm saying, my dear granddaughter, that David Harrison has been living entirely on my money while treating my only grandchild like an unwanted burden. And now that I've seen firsthand how he's chosen to use that privilege, it's time to have a conversation about the future. She looked at the house one more time, taking in the warm lights, the Christmas decorations, and the family that was celebrating inside without giving a single thought to the daughter they'd abandoned in the cold. When she turned back to me, her face held the kind of determination that moved mountains and toppled governments. One word, darling, she said, pulling out her phone to make a call that would change everything. Just one word and all of this ends tonight. Victoria stood there in the frozen December air, looking at the house where her granddaughter had been abandoned like unwanted luggage, and spoke the single word that would reshape our entire world: demolish. Inside the warm living room, Dad's head snapped up from his wine glass like he'd heard something impossible. He moved to the window, pressing his face against the glass the same way I'd been doing for the past 3 hours, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. A luxury limousine in his driveway, an elegant older woman in expensive clothes, and me standing beside her wearing a coat that cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. Jennifer, I heard him call, though his voice was muffled by the glass between us. Jennifer, get over here right now. Jennifer appeared at the window, still wearing my grandmother's emerald necklace like it had always belonged to her. When she saw Victoria standing next to me, her face drained of color so quickly, I thought she might faint. She grabbed Dad's arm with desperate fingers, saying something urgent that made both of them step back from the window. Victoria observed their panic with detached interest, like she was watching actors in a play perform exactly as she'd expected. David never was very good at thinking ahead, she commented casually, scrolling through contacts on her phone. Your mother used to worry about his impulsive decisions. She had no idea how right she was. What are you going to do? I asked, though part of me already knew. The answer would be something far beyond what my 17-year-old mind could fully comprehend. I'm going to remind your father that actions have consequences, Victoria said, selecting a number from her contacts, and that some debts always come due no matter how long you try to avoid paying them. The front door opened with such force it banged against the interior wall. Dad stumbled out into the cold wearing only his Christmas sweater and slippers, looking like a man who'd just witnessed the dead rising from their graves. His face was flushed from wine and shock, and he moved with the unsteady gait of someone whose world had just tilted off its axis. Victoria! His voice cracked on her name. But you're supposed to be... we thought you were... Dead, Victoria supplied helpfully. Yes, I heard about my supposed demise. Very tragic, according to the obituary you never bothered to verify. A heart attack in a Florida apartment I've never rented, surrounded by poverty that never existed. Quite the creative storytelling, David. Jennifer had followed him outside, wrapping a bathrobe around herself and casting nervous glances between Victoria's limousine and the neighbors' houses. She was clearly calculating how much of this conversation might be overheard, how much gossip would spread through the neighborhood by morning. I don't understand, Dad said, though his expression suggested he understood perfectly and was terrified by the implications. The lawyers told us you died 2 years ago. They said there was no estate, no assets to settle. Victoria's laugh could have frozen the December air even colder. What lawyers, David? The ones you hired to research my supposed death. The ones who told you exactly what you wanted to hear after you paid them to make inquiries about my finances. Dad's face went gray. How did you know about your little investigation into my net worth? Victoria finished. David, I've been in business for 40 years. I know when people are trying to determine whether I'm worth robbing. Your lawyers made inquiries that reached my actual attorneys within 24 hours. I've been aware of your interest in my supposed wealth since the week after Margaret's funeral. Trevor had appeared at the living room window, staring out at the scene with the fascination of someone watching a car accident in slow motion. The Christmas presents lay forgotten around him, no longer the most interesting thing happening in his world. I think we should take this conversation inside, Jennifer said quickly, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. The neighbors will start talking if we stand out here much longer. Oh, I think the neighbors will have plenty to talk about regardless, Victoria said pleasantly, but she gestured toward the house. But you're right. This conversation requires privacy and proper documentation. We moved toward the front door in a strange procession. Victoria walked beside me, her hand resting protectively on my shoulder, while Dad and Jennifer trailed behind us like defendants approaching a courthouse. The warmth of the house hit me like a physical blow after hours in the cold, and I realized how close I'd come to serious frostbite. The living room, which had looked so cozy and perfect from outside, felt different now that Victoria was in it. Her presence seemed to shrink the space, making our furniture look shabby and our Christmas decorations appear cheap and garish. She moved through the room with the confidence of someone who owned everything she touched because As I was beginning to understand, she probably did. Lovely decorations, she commented, examining Jennifer's elaborate Christmas setup. Very festive. I particularly admired the family photos you've chosen to display. She gestured toward the mantelpiece where every single image showed Dad, Jennifer, and Trevor in various combinations. Not one photo included me or my mother. Jennifer's hand moved instinctively to the emerald necklace she was still wearing. We wanted to create new memories, she said defensively. Mary needed to move forward, not dwell in the past. Fascinating perspective, Victoria said, opening her purse and removing a folder that looked distinctly legal. And I suppose forcing her to move forward required relocating her to the basement while Trevor took her bedroom. Required excluding her from family vacations. Required the stealing her inheritance to fund your lifestyle. We never stole anything, Dad protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Mary is well cared for. She has everything she needs. Victoria gestured toward me, still wrapped in her expensive coat. My lips blue from cold and my hair hanging in frozen strands. This is your definition of well cared for, locking a child outside in sub-zero temperatures because she dared to mention her deceased mother. She opened the folder and removed several documents that made Dad's face go even paler. David Harrison, she read aloud. Current debt obligations to Ashworth Holdings, LLC, $473,000. This includes the mortgage on this property, the operating loan for Harrison Construction, 3 business credit lines, and the personal loan you took out last year to pay for Trevor's private school tuition. The silence in the room was deafening. Even Trevor had stopped pretending to play his PlayStation and was staring at the adults with growing comprehension that his world was about to change dramatically. Ashworth Holdings, Dad repeated slowly. That's my company, yes? Victoria confirmed. The same company that's been funding your lifestyle for the past 3 years under the assumption that you were using the money to properly care for my granddaughter. An assumption that appears to have been tragically mistaken. Jennifer's voice came out as barely a whisper. You own our house. I own everything, Victoria said matter-of-factly. The house, the business, the credit lines David used to purchase his truck, the loan he took out to pay for your wedding ring. Every dollar you've spent for the past 3 years came from my accounts transferred through various subsidiaries to mask the source. She turned to Dad with an expression that could have melted steel. Did you really think I would allow my granddaughter to live in poverty? Did you honestly believe I would let Margaret's child suffer because of your pride and incompetence? Dad sank into his recliner like a man who just received a terminal diagnosis. I don't understand any of this. The lawyers said you were dead. The estate was supposed to be settled. The lawyers you hired were second-rate private investigators who told you what you wanted to hear in exchange for $5,000, Victoria said coldly. They had no access to my actual financial information, no connections to my real legal team, and no ability to verify anything they claimed. They simply took your money and gave you a story that justified the inheritance theft you were already planning. She removed another document from her folder, this one with official seals and legal stamps. This is your daughter's actual inheritance, David. The trust fund her mother established before her death, supplemented by my own contributions over the past 3 years. The current value is approximately $2.7 million held in accounts you've never accessed because you never knew they existed. $2.7 million, the number hit me like a physical blow, and I had to sit down on the couch to keep from falling over. All those years of listening to Dad complain about money all those times, I'd felt guilty for needing school supplies or new clothes, all those moments when I'd believed we were barely scraping by. But that's impossible, Jennifer stammered. Margaret never had that kind of money. Her family lost everything in the recession. Victoria's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Margaret told you that story because she was ashamed of our family's wealth and wanted David to love her for herself, not her trust fund. It was a noble but ultimately foolish decision, as subsequent events have proven. She opened her phone and showed Dad a screen that made him visibly flinch. This is the current status of all your loans, David, due and payable immediately upon my request. Would you like to know what happens to your construction business when I call in the operating loan? What happens to this house when I foreclose on the mortgage? What happens to Trevor's education when his tuition payments stop? The power dynamic in the room had shifted so completely it was dizzying. 30 minutes ago, Dad had been the authority figure, the man who controlled my life with absolute power. Now he looked like a child who'd been caught stealing from the church collection plate. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. Victoria looked at me then, at the emerald necklace Jennifer was still wearing, then at the boxes of my mother's belongings scattered across Dad's desk in the next room. "I want justice, David, and I want my granddaughter to finally receive the love and respect she deserves." She pulled out her phone again, fingers poised over the screen. "With one phone call, I can have foreclosure papers filed on this property. With another, I can have your business loans called due immediately. With a third, I can have Child Protective Services here within the hour to investigate the conditions under which Mary has been living." Dad's face went white. "You can't be serious!" "I have never been more serious about anything in my life," Victoria said, her finger hovering over the first number. "The only question now is whether you want to face these consequences with dignity or whether you prefer to be dragged through them kicking and screaming." Victoria scrolled through her phone with the casual efficiency of someone conducting routine business, but every number she revealed hit Dad like a physical blow. "Let's begin with the trust fund theft, shall we?" she said, pulling up bank records that made Jennifer gasp audibly. The Margaret Rose Harrison Memorial Trust has been disbursing $3,000 monthly to David Harrison for child care expenses since January 22, 2021. Total disbursements to date $108,000. She looked up at Dad with raised eyebrows. "Would you like to explain how those funds have been used for Mary's benefit?" Dad's mouth opened and closed without sound coming out. I could see his mind racing, trying to calculate explanations that might minimize the damage, but the evidence was too comprehensive for creative accounting. "Perhaps I can help," Victoria continued mercilessly. "Trevor's tuition at Riverside Preparatory Academy, $18,000 annually. Jennifer's membership at the Westfield Country Club, $12,000 annually. The European vacation last summer, $37,000. The jewelry Jennifer is currently wearing, purchased from Meridian Estates, $22,000. With each revelation, Jennifer seemed to shrink further into herself. She finally reached up and unclasped the emerald necklace with trembling fingers as if removing evidence of a crime. "But the most interesting discovery," Victoria said, producing another folder, "came when my investigators examined the insurance settlement from Margaret's death. $600,000 in life insurance benefits, David. The beneficiary was listed as Mary Harrison, with you designated as trustee until her 18th birthday." I felt the room spinning around me. $600,000, but Dad said there was barely enough to cover the funeral costs. "The funeral cost $8,000, Victoria said gently. "A very modest affair considering the resources available. The remaining $592,000 should have been placed in a secured account for your benefit. Instead, it appears to have funded some significant lifestyle improvements." She opened a photo on her phone and showed Dad the screen. "This is your bank account activity for the past 3 years, David. Large deposits followed immediately by transfers to Jennifer's personal account, payments to luxury retailers, and cash withdrawals that total more than the annual salary of most American families." Dad finally found his voice, though. It came out as a croak. "I had expenses. Raising a child is expensive. The house needed repairs, Mary needed clothes and school supplies." "Mary has been wearing the same 3 outfits to school for the past year," Victoria said coldly. "Her teachers have noticed. They've also noticed that she frequently goes without lunch because her meal account is consistently underfunded. Meanwhile, Jennifer has been posting photos on social media of shopping sprees that cost more than most families spend on groceries in 6 months." Jennifer's face had gone completely white. "How could you possibly know about my social media posts?" "My dear woman, when you're suspected of defrauding a minor out of nearly $700,000, every aspect of your digital footprint becomes relevant evidence." Victoria's tone suggested she found Jennifer's naivety almost amusing. Your Instagram account alone documents purchases totaling over $40,000 in the past 8 months, all funded, it appears, by money that legally belongs to my granddaughter. Trevor, who had been silent throughout this financial revelation, suddenly spoke up from his position by the PlayStation. So, does this mean I have to give back my Christmas presents? The innocence of the question might have been funny under different circumstances, but Victoria's expression remained deadly serious. Everything in this house that was purchased with Mary's stolen inheritance will need to be returned or its value repaid, yes? She turned back to Dad with a folder that looked even more official than the others. But we're not finished with the financial irregularities, David. This is the settlement documentation from the Ashworth construction lawsuit. You remember that case, don't you? The apartment complex that developed structural problems 6 months after completion. Dad's face went gray. That was settled out of court. The insurance covered everything. The insurance covered the property damage, yes, but the personal injury claims required additional compensation. $2.3 million to be exact. Money that came from the Ashworth family trust because your business insurance had lapsed due to non-payment of premiums. I watched Dad's world collapse in real time. You paid the settlement. Hey, I paid to keep you out of prison, David, because I didn't want Mary to grow up visiting her father behind bars. But the payment came with conditions. You were supposed to use Mary's trust fund money only for her direct benefit. You were supposed to maintain detailed records of all expenditures. And you were supposed to allow me supervised visitation with my granddaughter. Victoria's voice grew harder with each violation. Instead, you told Mary I was dead, stole her inheritance money for personal use, and treated her like an unwanted burden while lavishing her stolen resources on your new family. Tonight's abandonment in sub-zero temperatures was simply the final confirmation that you never intended to honor any aspect of our agreement. She opened another app on her phone, showing Dad what appeared to be a video call screen. This is my legal team standing by in my New York offices. They're prepared to file criminal fraud charges against both you and Jennifer by morning. The evidence package includes bank records, social media documentation, witness testimonials from Mary's teachers, and security footage from this evening, showing you locking your daughter outside in dangerous weather conditions. Jennifer finally found her voice, though it came out as desperate pleading. We can pay it back. We'll sell everything. Return all the money, whatever you want. Just please don't destroy our family. Victoria's laugh held no warmth whatsoever. Your family, Jennifer, you've been stealing from a child. You've been wearing jewelry that belonged to her deceased mother while treating her like a servant. You've been posting photos of luxury vacations funded by her inheritance money while she ate cereal for dinner because you couldn't be bothered to keep her meal account funded. She turned to me with an expression of gentle concern. Mary, sweetheart, there's something else you need to know. Something about the gifts I've been sending you every year for your birthday and Christmas. I looked at her blankly. But I never received any gifts from you. Dad said you couldn't afford to send anything after you lost your money. Victoria's jaw tightened as she pulled out her phone again. I have shipping confirmations for 47 packages sent to this address over the past 3 years. Birthday gifts, Christmas presents, care packages during the school year. Music boxes, jewelry books, gift cards, birthday cards with substantial cash amounts. Total value approximately $15,000. She showed me the screen displaying a long list of shipped packages all marked as delivered to our address. Where do you suppose these items have gone, David? Dad's silence was answer enough, but Trevor inadvertently provided confirmation. Oh, those boxes, Mom always said they were mistakes, deliveries for the wrong address. We donated most of the stuff to charity. Victoria's control finally cracked, and for a moment, I saw the fury she'd been carefully containing. You donated my granddaughter's gifts to charity while telling her I didn't care enough to send anything. She made a quick call, speaking briefly to someone on the other end. When she hung up, her expression had hardened into something that promised serious consequences. That was my head of security, David. He's currently at your storage unit, the one you rented under Jennifer's maiden name to hide assets from potential creditors. The unit that contains approximately $30,000 worth of items purchased with Mary's stolen money, including several of the gifts I sent that were apparently too valuable to donate to charity. Dad seemed to collapse in on himself. How did you even know about the storage unit? I know about everything, David. The offshore account you opened in Jennifer's name, the cryptocurrency investments you made with Mary's college fund, the second mortgage you took out on this house without proper disclosure to the trust administrators. I know about all of it because I've had investigators documenting your financial crimes for the past 18 months. She opened one final folder, this one containing what looked like legal documents with multiple signatures. This is a custody modification petition, David, along with criminal complaints for embezzlement, child endangerment, and fraud. My lawyers can file these documents tonight, or we can discuss alternative arrangements. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock that had belonged to my mother. Outside, the Christmas lights on neighboring houses continued twinkling cheerfully, completely unaware that our family was disintegrating in real time. What kind of alternative arrangements? Dad asked quietly. Victoria looked at me, then back at him. That depends entirely on whether you're capable of putting Mary's interests ahead of your own for the first time in 3 years, and whether you're willing to face the consequences of your choices with whatever dignity you have left. Victoria turned to me with an expression I'd never seen directed my way before, complete respect for my autonomy and intelligence. Mary, you're 17 years old. In 8 months, you'll legally be an adult. The decisions we make tonight will affect the rest of your life, and I believe you deserve to have a voice in determining what justice looks like. She gestured toward Dad, who sat hunched in his chair like a man waiting for sentencing, and Jennifer, who was clutching Trevor protectively while tears streamed down her face. I can have them arrested tonight. The evidence is overwhelming, and criminal fraud charges would likely result in significant prison time for both of them. Trevor would enter the foster care system. This house would be seized as asset recovery, and David's construction business would be liquidated to pay restitution. The power she was offering me felt overwhelming. 3 hours ago, I'd been powerless, locked outside in freezing temperatures with no recourse and no hope. Now I held the ability to completely destroy the people who had made my life miserable. The temptation was enormous. Or, Victoria continued, we can pursue civil remedies, full restitution of stolen funds, supervised visitation rights for me, proper living arrangements for you, and community service requirements that might teach them something about the value of the money they've been stealing. I looked at Dad, trying to reconcile this broken man with the father who used to read me bedtime stories and help me with homework before Mom died. Somewhere inside this stranger who had locked me outside on Christmas Eve was the man who had held me while I cried after Mom's funeral, promising me that everything would be okay. I need to see something first, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Victoria nodded approvingly. What would you like to see? The storage unit, the gifts you sent that they kept from me. I want to understand exactly what was taken from me before I decide what happens next. Within 30 minutes, we were standing outside a climate-controlled storage facility across town. Victoria's driver having transported us in the limousine while Dad and Jennifer followed in his truck. The unit was larger than my bedroom, filled with boxes and furniture that should have been in our house. The first thing I saw was my mother's china cabinet, the one Dad claimed had been too damaged in the move to keep. It sat against the back wall in perfect condition, its glass shelves holding items I'd never seen before, crystal vase, silver picture frames, and decorative pieces that spoke of wealth and taste. Your mother's wedding china, Victoria said softly, opening one of the boxes to reveal delicate porcelain place settings for 12. She registered for these at Nordstrom before your father convinced her that practical dishes would be more useful for their budget. I bought the entire set as a wedding gift. Box after box revealed treasures that had been hidden from me. Jewelry that matched pieces I remembered my mother wearing, books with inscriptions in Victoria's handwriting, photo albums documenting my mother's childhood in settings that looked like magazine spreads rather than normal family homes. But it was the corner dedicated to my stolen gifts that broke my heart completely. Birthday presents. I'd never received Christmas gifts that would have brought me joy during the darkest periods of my grief care packages, filled with items chosen specifically for a teenage girl who was growing up without her mother's guidance. One box contained a jewelry box that played the same melody as the one in my bedroom. Apparently, the first in a series Victoria had planned to give me over the years, each one slightly more sophisticated as I grew older. Another held a laptop computer with a note explaining it was for my sophomore year of high school, when my coursework would require more technology than the ancient desktop computer in our family room. "This one was for your 16th birthday," Victoria said, opening a box that contained car keys attached to a BMW keychain. Not the car itself, obviously, but the promise of driving lessons and a vehicle when you were ready. David cashed the gift card and used the money for Jennifer's birthday trip to Napa Valley. I found cards and letters I'd never seen, birthday messages and Christmas notes that would have made me feel connected to family during the loneliest periods of the past 3 years. Victoria had written about my mother's teenage years, shared family history I'd never heard, offered advice and encouragement for situations she couldn't have known I was facing, but somehow understood anyway. She knows about Mom's favorite flowers," I said, reading a birthday card that mentioned my mother's love of white roses. "She knows about the music box collection and the way Mom used to braid my hair for school pictures." Dad stood at the entrance to the storage unit, staring at the evidence of his systematic theft with an expression of growing horror. "I didn't realize there were so many," he said weakly. Jennifer handled most of the packages. She said they were promotional materials or catalog samples. Jennifer couldn't meet anyone's eyes. "The first few seemed like mistakes," she said defensively. "Expensive items addressed to Mary, but with no return address or explanation. I thought someone was trying to scam us." "So you kept them instead of investigating?" Victoria's voice could have frozen water. "You kept jewelry worth thousands of dollars, electronics, gift cards, and cash because you thought they were promotional materials." The evidence of their betrayal was overwhelming, but what hurt most was understanding how deliberate it had been. These weren't crimes of desperation or mistakes made in difficult circumstances. They were calculated decisions to steal from a grieving child while making her believe she was alone in the world. But standing there surrounded by evidence of Victoria's love and my father's betrayal, I realized something important. The revenge I could take would feel satisfying in the moment, but it wouldn't heal the damage that had been done. It wouldn't bring back the 3 years of connection with my grandmother that I'd lost, or erase the pain of feeling abandoned and worthless. "I want them to understand what they took from me," I said finally. "Not just the money, but the relationship, the connection to my family that they stole. I want them to work to earn forgiveness instead of just facing punishment." Victoria studied my face carefully. "That's a very mature perspective, Mary, but it also means accepting that they might never truly understand the harm they've caused. Are you prepared for that possibility?" I looked at Dad, who was crying now as he examined a photo album of my mother's childhood that he'd never allowed me to see. At Jennifer, who was finally beginning to comprehend the magnitude of what she'd participated in. At Trevor, who was old enough to understand that his privileged lifestyle had been funded by stolen money. "I think people have to choose to change," I said. "I can give them the opportunity, but I can't force them to take it. What I can control is whether I let their choices continue to define my life." Victoria smiled at me with genuine pride. "Your mother would be very proud of the woman you're becoming, Mary. What would you like to happen next?" I took a deep breath, surrounded by the material evidence of everything I'd lost, but also everything I'd gained by surviving it. "I want justice, but I want it to mean something more than just punishment." The conversation that shaped our family's future took place not in a courtroom, but around the kitchen table where I'd eaten countless silent dinners while being treated like an unwelcome guest. But this time, I wasn't the powerless child begging for scraps of attention. I was Victoria Ashworth's granddaughter with legal representation that made Dad's hands shake every time they spoke. Complete financial restitution. Victoria's lawyer explained reading from a settlement agreement that would restructure our entire family. David and Jennifer will work with a court-appointed financial advisor to develop a repayment plan for the stolen trust funds. The house will be transferred to Mary's ownership, with David and Jennifer paying rent at market rates until alternative arrangements can be made. Dad signed each document with the resignation of a man who understood he was receiving mercy instead of justice. What about my business? Your business will operate under court supervision, the lawyer continued. All profits above basic living expenses will go toward restitution until Mary's trust fund is restored to its proper balance. Additionally, you'll perform 200 hours of community service annually, working with organizations that help children in foster care. I watched Jennifer absorb the reality that her lifestyle of country club memberships and European vacations was over, probably forever. But when she looked at me across the table, I saw something that might have been genuine remorse rather than just self-pity. "Mary," she said quietly, "I know this doesn't change anything, but I want you to know that I convinced myself you didn't need those things. I told myself you were resilient, that you didn't mind being treated differently. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." It wasn't enough, and it didn't erase 3 years of cruelty, but it was the first time she'd acknowledged that I was a person with feelings that mattered. "Thank you," I said simply, because even inadequate apologies deserved acknowledgement when they were sincere. The most difficult conversation came when we discussed Trevor's future. His private school tuition would end immediately, and he'd finish high school in public school like most American teenagers. The college fund that had been built with my stolen inheritance money would be redirected to my education, leaving him to earn scholarships or take student loans like his peers. "It's not fair," Trevor protested. "I didn't know the money was stolen. Why should I be punished for something Dad and Mom did?" Victoria's response was gentle but firm. "Life isn't fair, Trevor. Mary didn't deserve to lose her mother or have her inheritance stolen, but those things happened anyway. What matters now is how you choose to handle adversity. You can become bitter about losing privileges you never earned, or you can work to build something meaningful through your own efforts." The transformation in our household happened gradually over the following months. Dad went to work every morning, knowing that his earnings belonged to me until his debt was paid. Jennifer took a job at a department store, learning for the first time what it meant to work for money instead of simply spending it. Trevor struggled with his new circumstances, but slowly began to understand that respect had to be earned rather than demanded. But the most profound changes happened in my relationship with Victoria. Every Saturday, she would drive down from New York to spend the day with me, sharing stories about my mother's childhood and teaching me about the business empire I would someday inherit. We visited art museums and attended Broadway shows, traveled to the family estate in the Hamptons, and gradually built the relationship that should have developed years earlier. "Your mother and I fought about money," Victoria explained one afternoon as we walked through the garden at the estate. She wanted to prove that she could build a life without family wealth, and I wanted to protect her from making the same mistakes I'd made in my first marriage. We were both stubborn, and we both said things we regretted. She stopped beside a fountain that had been built in memory of my great-grandmother. I stayed away after she married David because I was angry and because I thought giving them space would help their relationship succeed. When she got sick, I tried to help financially, but David was too proud to accept assistance from the mother-in-law he barely tolerated. By the time she died, too much damage had been done to our relationship. "She missed you," I said, remembering fragments of conversations where Mom had mentioned her mother with sadness rather than anger. "She used to tell me stories about growing up here, and she always smiled when she talked about you." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I should have fought harder to maintain our relationship. I should have insisted on spending time with you after she died. I let David's pride and my own stubbornness rob us of precious years together. But we were making up for lost time now. Victoria enrolled me in test preparation courses for college admissions exams, arranged tutoring to help me catch up on subjects where my education had been neglected, and began teaching me the basics of business management. She also made sure I had therapy to help process the trauma of feeling abandoned and worthless for so long. Healing isn't linear, my therapist explained during one of our sessions. You might feel angry about lost time, grateful for new opportunities, and sad about what happened all at the same time. All of those feelings are valid. The most surprising development was watching Dad gradually transform into someone I could recognize as the father I'd lost when Mom died. The community service requirement connected him with families facing real hardship, and seeing children who had lost parents to addiction or violence gave him perspective on his own failures. He started attending therapy sessions with me, awkward conversations where we slowly rebuilt trust that had been shattered by his choices. I told myself I was protecting you from disappointment, he admitted during one particularly difficult session. Your grandmother's family seemed so wealthy and sophisticated, and I felt like I could never measure up. When she supposedly died and there was no inheritance, I felt relieved because it meant you wouldn't know what you were missing. But I was missing it anyway, I replied. I was missing having a grandmother who loved me, missing the connection to my mother's family, missing the security of knowing I had value beyond what I could do for other people. Jennifer's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. Working retail taught her empathy for people struggling financially, and her community service at a women's shelter showed her what real hardship looked like. She returned my mother's jewelry and helped me sort through the belongings that had been hidden in the storage unit, sharing stories about items she'd never bothered to appreciate when she was stealing them. "Bay Tetzai, your mother's wedding ring," she said, holding up a simple gold band that had belonged to my grandmother. "I wore it sometimes when David wasn't home, pretending it was mine. I never thought about what it meant to you or what it represented about your family's history." The first Christmas after Victoria's return was nothing like the previous years. Instead of locked doors and stolen presents, we celebrated at the family estate with foster children Victoria had invited to share our holiday. I watched teenagers who had aged out of the system experience luxuries they'd never imagined. And I understood that privilege carried the responsibility to lift others up rather than hoard advantages. True wealth isn't about what you own, Victoria explained as we served dinner to our guests. It's about what you can give away and still have enough. Your mother understood that, and I hope you will too. By the time I graduated high school, our family had found a new equilibrium. Dad and Jennifer had developed genuine respect for me as a person, rather than seeing me as an obligation or inconvenience. Trevor had earned a partial scholarship to a state university and was working weekends to pay for his remaining expenses, and I had been accepted to Columbia University with plans to study business and nonprofit management. The night before I left for college, Dad asked me to walk with him around the neighborhood where I'd grown up. We passed the house where he'd locked me out on Christmas Eve, the windows that had framed my abandonment, the yard where Victoria had found me shivering and powerless. "I can't undo the harm I caused," he said as we stood on the sidewalk where the limousine had changed everything. "But I want you to know that watching you choose forgiveness over revenge taught me more about strength and character than anything else in my life. You could have destroyed us completely, and you chose to give us a chance to become better people instead." "I didn't do it for you," I said honestly. "I did it because I realized that carrying hate and anger would hurt me more than it would hurt you. Choosing mercy was choosing my own healing." The foundation I established with Victoria's help has grown into something that affects thousands of families every year. We provide emergency assistance to children whose parents die unexpectedly, legal advocacy for kids whose inheritances are being mismanaged, and educational opportunities for teenagers aging out of foster care. The work is challenging and sometimes heartbreaking, but it gives meaning to everything I survived. 5 years later, I stood in my mother's childhood bedroom at the family estate, now converted into a scholarship office where we interview candidates for educational grants. Through the window, I could see the garden where Victoria and I had walked and talked through our family's complicated history. The pain of those 3 dark years hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into purpose and strength. True justice isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about breaking cycles of harm and building something better from the broken pieces. My father locked me outside in the cold because he'd forgotten how to see me as a person, worthy of love and respect. My grandmother found me there and helped me discover that my worth wasn't determined by other people's failures. The greatest gift wasn't the inheritance money or the family estate or even the relationship with Victoria that I'd been denied for so long. The greatest gift was learning that I had the power to choose who I became in response to how I'd been treated. I could become bitter and vengeful, or I could become someone who protected other children from experiencing what I'd survived. What would you do if you discovered that everything you thought was true about your family was actually a lie designed to steal your future? Would you choose revenge against the people who betrayed you, or would you choose to build something better from the pain they caused? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if you believe in the power of choosing healing over hatred. Subscribe for more stories about families who found their way back to each other despite impossible odds, and share this with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by how others treat them. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope you find the strength to choose love over bitterness no matter what challenges you're facing in your own life.